I'll quickly pass it on to Ed and Istvan to give us an update on the Payment Hub EE. Ed?
Okay, thank you, everyone. So Istvan and I are just going to share some updates again on like the progress with the Payment Hub Enterprise Edition and other ongoing updates with our Mifos lab. So just at a high level, today I might be repeating some of the messages we've spoken to at previous community meetings, but I think there's a number of topics that have come up in other sessions and panels. And I think a lot of like the tooling and messaging that we are aiming to promote from sessions before really align now with the current pain points of the community and some of the priorities and objectives. So I'm going to start out just by sharing some of these updates, and then Istvan's going to do a number of demos and technical updates as well. So I think you're all familiar with Istvan and myself, but for the new folks at the convenings that we haven't had a chance to meet in person, this slide is a reference point, but I oversee the Mifos Initiative. We provide an open source core banking platform for the base of the pyramid. And then Istvan leads the team at DPC in Hungary, one of our Mifos partners who've been implementing the Payment Hub components and has lengthy experience implementing real-time payment systems at various levels. And so I just wanted to return, one more time, once again, to emphasize like the pain points that we're trying to address and how those align with the objectives of the Mojaloop community and Mojaloop Foundation. So, first off, from day one, we've been working on the Payment Hub Enterprise Edition as an open source tool to help DFSPs both connect to seamlessly as well as participate in Mojaloop powered switches. And then secondly, the lab environment that we've built out provides like a valuable tool that helps align with these objectives around demonstrating the value of Mojaloop to stakeholders and helping to reduce overall friction, build awareness, and advance adoption. So just at a high level, once again, wanted to return to like what we're aiming to achieve with our Payment Hub Enterprise Edition. So we're aiming to provide, as an asset to the broader community, like an open source engine or business operations framework at the DFSP level, which provides both a seamless connection layer as well as this operational control center for DFSPs, so they can seamlessly connect to a Mojaloop powered switch. And so I'll talk more about some of the benefits of the Payment Hub on subsequent slides, and Istvan will emphasize some of the recent enhancements during his demos. And then secondly, the main thrust of our efforts have been a lab environment that we're eager to connect to the central Mojaloop community lab environment, and the value that, our lab environment we can provide, including the Payment Hub integration, is also just the fact that we've got corresponding, reference open source tooling and UIs, both at the DFSP as well as the customer level, that can help to really bring to life a number of the Mojaloop use cases in a hands-on manner, but also provide a reference open source tool set to help advance innovation and help advance adoption. And then this slide here is one, that sort of is re-envisioning a position we've tried to continue to assert at the previous meetings before, that really aligns well with a perspective that Miller had around where, the innovation was going to be, like not necessarily at the central switch level, but innovation and adoption is going to flow more at the account and app level. And so wanted to have this articulation here to show that, the complementary open source tool set that we're providing, as well as the Payment Hub EE, can both fuel adoption and also enable innovation by both DFSP participants as well as fintech participants in a Mojaloop switch. And so the Payment Hub EE is going to enable more DFSPs to connect and leverage the Mojaloop open API. And then by providing an open source core banking API layer through Mifos and Fineract, that can help to enable the rapid opening of accounts and wallets and a stable open platform to innovate from. And then through, our tooling and through providing access to multiple layers of third-party APIs, whether it's the PISP API from Mojaloop that we want to integrate with, or the open banking API we provide, or the over-the-top API like GSMA Mobile Money API, this can further enable that app-level innovation. So really, looking at how we can fuel that long tail of innovation and adoption at the app and account level, and really by providing these commoditized pieces of infrastructure enable more of that competition and innovation at those other two layers. And so my next couple of slides are just going to focus once again really on why open source matters, and listening to a lot of the discussion, the panel from Paul, Steve, and Leslie Ann, helped to make me remember how important some of the messages around open source were, both at a technical level or a tactical level around the tools we're implementing, but also more, strategically at a community level between our complementary Mifos and Mojaloop open source communities. So first off, just wanted to, once again, remind everyone on an important announcement that was made, I think a month or two ago from the Digital Public Goods Alliance, identifying, Mojaloop along with Mifos, Fineract, OpenG2P, MOSIP, and these other projects as a number of the 7 foundational digital public goods as part of their financial inclusion community of practice. And I think this was an important recognition, and we should, seize the momentum around being identified as these key open source building blocks, which can help advance financial inclusion at a country level. And right now, we've already begun like a good, strong roundtable of these various projects, but I think there's more opportunities to collaborate strategically together as digital public goods, and really to try to find deployments where we can showcase end-to-end how these building blocks can be put together as foundational elements to advance financial inclusion, especially more around this G2P context. And so with, setting the stage more around this momentum around digital public goods, I also just wanted to bring up this slide that I know I've presented at a number of our open source meetings before, but I think it really helped to, like a number of the discussion points during that panel that Steve and Paul and Leslie Ann were on around democratizing access to MFIs and connecting their clients, as well as, providing a level playing field for fintechs versus platfins and tech giants. It made me want to, emphasize some of the key messages around open source that we've been trying to tell in the past. So the first off, just like the Rails being open and them not being controlled by a single player, we really do believe that the entire stack itself should be open as well. And so that includes, the tools for DFSPs to connect to the switch, but having this open core banking and wallet layer, and then having these other open building blocks to help to enable, as I spoke to before, that account and app level innovation is key. And so once again, want to reiterate that, believe that at the rail and account level, that should become commoditized infrastructure. And then you can really enable innovation to occur, not just on the payment rail, but also on that open source account rail. And so on the next couple of slides, I'm going to take a closer look at our ecosystem, because it helps to provide a bit of the context of some of the lessons we've learned and challenges we've faced that I think we can, help collectively overcome along with the Mojaloop community. And then at a tactical level, how the open source tooling we're building out for DFSP participation can be better leveraged by the community. So this is also a slide we've presented before, but just wanted to once again, take a quick look at the stack that we provide to help provide this end-to-end open source stack for digital financial services. So we provide the backend platform. So both like 2 generations of it. One, more of the monolithic app architecture, which provides a core banking platform that's API based for financial inclusion providers, and then our next generation architecture, which aims to be an application framework for digital financial services, providing a more modular and scalable cloud native microservices based architecture, and then the corresponding web apps for staff, and then also providing reference customer facing apps for mobile and online banking to provide that omni-channel experience. And then, as we touched on before, those other API layers to help enable quick third-party innovation. And then I'm going to have 2 slides here just speaking more about the ecosystem itself, because I think the history there provides some context of where our projects come from and the lessons we've learned and challenges that we have tried to overcome, and challenges that the Mojaloop community is facing that we can help collectively overcome. And then it also helps to just demonstrate more of that innovation we think can occur in these upstream communities, not just around the switch itself, but also around the DFSP operational tools. So a key phase in the trajectory of our project was, when we launched the second generation of the Mifos and Fineract software, which was production ready in 2013. And in that time, we switched to more of this platform-based architecture and having a cleanly separated back and front end with a full API, which could enable third parties to come and either build their own solutions or build, their own like varieties of fintech applications on the platform itself. So this slide here focuses on a number of the commercial companies that have taken the open source APIs and built their own cloud-based core banking systems, with their own user experience, their own value-added features, and other integrations and region-specific needs that they've added on to their distributions. And so these, companies like Musoni and FinFlux, they've been able to support hundreds of financial institutions reaching millions of clients, and organizations like Musoni are now even providing, their own API layer, which is published in the CGAP Open API dashboard that are powered by the Fineract APIs to really enable innovation amongst their consumers. And then the other point I just wanted to make on this slide is that, by seeing this adoption here and seeing how we're trying to move towards a functional contribution model, it's helped to play out a number of the challenges that I think we can both collectively overcome as respective communities focused on open source for financial inclusion. And so apart from these companies that have built, their own cloud-based core banking systems on our APIs, we've got dozens of fintechs globally who have also, recognized like the stability of an open source backend for account and wallet and core banking management, and then utilize specific aspects of that architecture to power their fintech solutions. And so there's a number of fintech solutions that are supported by, our partners and also organically adopted. And so this slide, really wanted to reiterate once again how an open source account layer can be the innovation that powers the innovators, and showcasing, the efforts we've had in trying to build out a vibrant ecosystem and community, but also identifying some of the challenges that we've started to see in trying to build out this community and transition them from just consumers of open source to contributors themselves. And so as I, have touched on, like we have a widespread community and ecosystem of, companies that are successful commercially building and consuming the open source platform and underlying APIs. But especially as of late, we've struggled to transition them to become contributors, and also, have that greater focus on reinvigorating the virtuous cycle of innovation. And I know, the Mojaloop community recognizes the importance of this virtuous cycle. So I think there's a number of pain points, we've addressed, and lessons we've tried to overcome, and challenges we can collectively face in trying to build out this virtuous cycle, which is, a game-changing approach of our way in which we can build out ecosystems that help to collectively develop and maintain that core open platform, but still allowing for differentiation and competition of solutions on top of it itself. And then I'll come back to this slide, one more time, as I think it once again, speaks to how we've been able to build out an ecosystem, innovating at that account layer, and how I think we can collectively leverage what we're putting in place with the payment hub to help drive more adoption of an open source rail in terms of Mojaloop, and then leveraging those PISP APIs in Mojaloop and the core Mojaloop Open API itself to fuel more of that app level innovation. But I think a key part of this slide here is the critical part of the payment hub and that connection to DFSPs being an open source tool that others can innovate around. And so I talked about this at our last convening, but once again, want to emphasize the importance we see in having this DFSP business operations layer, or more of the onboarding and participation layer, be built in an open manner. And so that's been a fundamental architectural goal of ours since developing the payment hub. And we've been, eagerly speaking with Modusbox around Payment Manager, around collaborative efforts to move forward, developing these tools in a more aligned fashion. But, overall, we believe by having this open source layer for DFSPs to connect, it can lower the overall total cost of ownership, and accelerate the adoption amongst DFSPs of all sizes. And then by enabling a virtuous cycle and fostering upstream contribution at not just the layer of the switch, but also at DFSP operations, we can help to drive more innovation faster by collaborating around this common space. And then lastly, having this open approach can also help to more quickly onboard other integrators and vendors who can help in, connecting the multiple DFSPs that will have to connect, and also provide more of a sustainable business model where they can, build out their solutions and collaborate around an open core, which is something I'll touch on in one of my subsequent slides. And so just in talking about, open and framing how we can work together more effectively over the next several months, wanted to come back to a mantra that Leslie Ann has been emphasizing around going farther together. And so first off, wanted to focus on a number of areas where we could work together more effectively as communities at a strategic level, and then more tactically around how we can, better leverage the other community efforts, and also how the open source tooling we've built out can be deployed more effectively across the Mojaloop community. So here, I wanted to emphasize just that I think as, peer projects and digital public goods that have been recognized to advance the interests of financial inclusion, that we can collaborate more closely. And so first off, I think we can better, as communities, the Mifos and Mojaloop communities, leverage the collective assets that we have in place to help to drive more deployments. And so would like to, work with the other digital public goods and the financial inclusion community of practice to identify how we can work towards, common reference deployments that show how these building blocks can be deployed end to end together. And I think G2P is one of those focus areas where we could really, work along with other projects like Mifos to be a leader and showcase innovation in that regard. And then I also think, collectively we can work together around providing, not just like a switch and data but other open source tooling to help with these regulatory sandboxes and sandbox or fintech sandpits that were talked about, as I think having, access to these open toolings along with these sources of synthetic data can really help to prove out the value and help fintechs innovate more quickly. And then I think one other way we can collaborate better strategically is trying to address some of these challenges that we're starting to see. So first off, something that's come up at a product council a number of times has been, how we define like the boundaries of what that open core is, and then, what's that area of competitive space on top of the collaborative space where you can build out more of that marketplace. And so that's a challenge that we've, struggled and tried to find ways to overcome over the years within the Mifos community. I think secondly, one of the pain points that we've been trying to address is building this functional contribution model of upstream contributors. So both getting, commercial vendors to see the value in contributing back to the upstream version and being able to, easily maintain their solutions and not be on forks, but also getting, more enterprise level customers to recognize the values that their vendor can provide by being part of an upstream community. So I think being able to work collectively around how we can build out functional contribution models would be a good key area of collaboration. And then as we touched on during the Open G2P session a couple of days ago, I think there's a lot of work that could be done to help collectively address both like the narrative and the education process and bringing on board governments and regulators around adopting open source and changing some of the aspects of the ongoing RFP and procurement process. And then also, working with entities like Finos that are trying to drive open source adoption amongst financial service providers and working towards some of these resources collectively. And then in terms of tactically, how we can go farther together more at a tool level, I'm going to touch on a number of aspects on the subsequent slides here, but want to, emphasize that we've tried to be an active part of the community. Ishvan and I, Ishvan as member of Design Authority, and myself as member of the Community and Product Council, and then hope to better identify ways we can work effectively and leverage our tooling. So first off, we are very happy to see the ongoing efforts of Lewis to get a central lab environment out there for the community. And there are a number of ways, we think our lab, which provides this hands-on interactive tool set at multiple layers, can add value to the central lab for the community. So first off, we're in talks with Lewis to help provide access to reference DFSP UIs through our payment hub that can connect into this central lab environment to provide that more interactive hands-on experience. And then we also want to provide, the reference apps at a consumer level that can be used to test out. And then we'd like to better support, future DFS lab hackathons by having access to these reference UIs and sample data sets that can complement the Moduloop open APIs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, collaborating with other digital public goods to provide, more of the use cases showing how these open building blocks can be deployed collectively. And then, we're in talks with partners like Musoni to leverage the payment hub to connect in to provide demos of their solutions in these collective demo environments. And then we're a close part of the team, working along, being led by Chetan and other members of the product council around trying to formulate better demos. And so there are a number of, use cases that we can help to demonstrate both currently and ones we're wrapping up for P2P transfers, merchant request to pay, et cetera. So being able to demonstrate these through hands-on interactive user interfaces. And then also, the ZB modeler, which powers our payment hub, EE is also valuable in demonstrating some of these core Moduloop features. And then, I admit that we've not been the best in trying to leverage some of the other tooling that's out there and delivered by the community. So synchronizing our efforts and leveraging some of the tools that have been built, like the testing toolkit, the GSMA efforts with their interoperability test lab. We've been talking to Modusbox about having a version of the SDK for the payment hub to consume, and also utilizing the connection manager as part of our stack, and then working with the fraud and risk management team around leveraging, some of our lab that could help with testing at the DFSP level. And then this next slide here, just speaks to how we would like to have a hands-on and dedicated process, along with other members of the product council, to discuss collectively what those key requirements are at a DFSP operations level. So there's been good discussion around, defining what's core for biz ops at a hub level. And I think this should be done at the DFSP level as well. And so we're eager to continue this process and conversation to identify a common set of requirements and how we can collectively build together. And then, as we build out more of this common open tool set, we want to make sure that the tooling we've built out can be a part of helping to advance some of the ongoing efforts led by UNCDF in Tanzania and Myanmar. So even though we're not a formal part of the teams delivering those projects, we want to impart the lessons we've learned and make sure the tools that we have in place are accessible to those groups. I'm going to skip over these slides as we've spoken to them before. And then lastly, before I pass it on to Istvan, just want to touch on a little bit of the traction amongst the Moduloop and Mifos communities and how we're trying to advance those goals of more deployments. So first off, we're eager to have, as I touched on the last slide, the payment hub be a part of more of the ongoing projects. But in the meantime, we've been trying to drive adoption of it across the Mifos ecosystem to help advance production readiness and show that it can perform in a production environment. So you can see some of those details there around different channel connectors being built and where it's being deployed. And then lastly, we've been continuing to work with fintechs, especially like DaraPay from the last convening around leveraging our lab environment in the payment hub to test out some of their use cases. And then we're at early stage conversations more at a country level with a number of these opportunities that we're eager to, speak with Leslie Ann and the go-to-market team once they proceed along further. So I'll now pass it on to Istvan to do his demonstration. He's going to touch on a couple of points we've updated and share some technical details of performance testing we've been doing recently around the payment hub. Thanks, everyone. And you're able to take over the screen share, Istvan?
You need to stop it first. Thank you. And then I can just share my desktop and then go for that. So good afternoon, good morning to everyone. And I'd like to continue at presentation with a couple of information and demonstrations. So the payment hub purpose to connect the different core banking systems. And probably you have seen that yesterday we were talking about that The payment manager is connecting some of the core banking systems, and we connecting other couple of core banking systems, which we could bring these technologies together and provide more connections to multiple account management systems. On the other hand, we have the Modulo connector as a payment scheme connector, and I'd like to demonstrate today that we also implemented the ISO 20022 connector for the SEPA Instant Network in this payment hub to do transactions across the two networks if possible. So that's the idea of the payment hub, plus to provide a user interface that the operators could interact and they see that what transaction happened in the system. So a couple of words on the architecture, that there are the different connectors all running in a Kubernetes cluster, an orchestration engine in the middle of that, and we stream all this data for analysis and for users to access and operators at the DFSP level to see what happened with their transactions and do certain interactions with those transactions. There's a Kibana also, and there's the ZB operate interface that I try to show. Important thing that what during this whole design of this Payment Hub Enterprise Edition, we were trying to focus on the system integrators. So this is an open source tool and needs to be easy to adopt by others. So the idea that the business flow is what different teams gonna define or refine in their implementation, how they interact with their internal system. So there should be an easy to modify possibility for this one. And another aspect that, if possible, multiple programming languages to be used. It seems like nowadays it's pretty common to use that. So that's what we figured out. And also the easy and, if possible, stateless integration with the different core banks, what the DFSPs will having, and all the logic and the persistence is stored in the state machine, what we are having in this center. Another aspect of this payment hub, as this is an, let's say, comes naturally with the Mifos core banking platform, that we are multi-tenant, meaning that multiple banks could use a single payment hub instance to work with their own platform. I could show this in multiple different ways, like really different DFSPs leveraging a single deployment of the payment hub operator. We have seen examples that this was requested, like someone providing this in the cloud for multiple smaller DFSPs, or the other way that the core banking platform already supporting multiple DFSPs. So like a single deployment having multiple DFSPs, that scenario also could be supported by the payment hub, what we created. Now for the lab environment that I want to do these demos today, we have 3 independent deployments, altogether 6 DFSPs working together on multiple versions of Mifos for the core banking platform. And we utilize this multi-tenancy capability. So all of these independent deployments having 2 DFSPs deployed. We have one Modulo instance, and then we could send all these transactions across. Plus, in this lab environment, we have an open banking API gateway, so letting fintechs to interact with a simple REST API and initiate transactions. So this is an interesting point, that the PISP API is one way to interact with banks, and the Open Banking API is another way to interact with banks. Probably the two, the merits of the two could be aggregated at some point. So this is this environment I will use for demonstrating. And first I will do some performance testing on our larger deployment that we're going to continue after the convening with Miguel to use a really beefed up Modulo system, because that's what we have is a smaller instance. And then as you see that there's another deployment with 2 other banks inside and the smaller barebone instance over there, and the fintech who could integrate with one of our instances. So on the performance measurements, we run some tests on this lab environment. What we were aiming for, like 50-ish or 100-ish financial transactions. Then by financial transaction, I mean the complete...
Ishvan, I think, just sorry to interrupt you. I don't know if your screen, it didn't advance for me, but I'm still seeing the payment hub slide at the moment.
That's, let's see, did it change at this moment? So do you see the performance measurement slide at the moment in my screen?
Not for me.
Yeah. Okay, then let me do one step to stop share and start sharing again. Hopefully it's going to help. Yeah, I will keep it this way. So here's the performance measurement information, and what we come up with that like 300-ish financial parts, so just the transfers, and then we come up with 50-ish complete transaction flows, meaning the lookup plus the quotation and the transfer itself on this given Kubernetes node. We learned quite a lot as usual for this kind of thing. So the whole tuning operations, it's well documented in our payment hub handbook, that how to change the different parameters of the system. And what I'd like to show quickly, some kind of results at how the running instances and the latencies of the different components looks like. And if you can still see my screen, what I could do, do you see my Gmeter on the screen that I could just initiate like 100 transaction per second run for a minute? Yeah,
that's visible. Mm-hmm.
And then if I click start here, then you see the number of threads going up, and what I could show you that the number of instances going to show up in Grafana in our payment hub Kubernetes cluster, that how many process instances and how many workflow instances we are having. And as you see that this diagram here below demonstrates the instances and how much we are having running. As you see, the numbers are going up. And there is one more part of this diagram that I just like to point out as it's going to refresh, hopefully, in a couple of seconds. There's plenty of metrics to see and tune. And what I want to show you that the different latencies of the processing, the event processing in our orchestration engine and how they go. Then there's diagrams on the complete process execution times and the different information on the job lifetime. So why this performance test is running, that a single job, which is one step in the flow, how long does it take to complete from creation to the completion of that particular job. So we could all use all the statistics to tune the system to get the performance what we were aiming for. So that was roughly the performance test I was trying to show. And probably one more thing that I'd like to cover, that we implemented a way in the payment hub to integrate with ISO 20022 payment networks. So I could initiate a payment in our lab environment from a SEPA instant bank, which goes to the SEPA instant clearing and settlement mechanism. From there, we go to a DFSP, who has a system which has a technical account in the account management system. The funds arrives, we complete the SEPA instant transaction, and once it's completed and it has the necessary instructions to say that we need to pass this on to another module loop participant DFSP, then the payment hub will orchestrate the additional part of the flow and send it over to the other party. So let me show quickly what I can see. Here is our simulator for the SEPA instant payments. I obviously prepared some test cases to send from our Leopard bank to our Rhino bank, and I could run a test with this test sheet with one transaction per second, and I just do this one test. Now, what I could see that on our Kubernetes interface, we could see the messages which went through, at least I hope so. Here they are. So this is the PAC 08s and the PAC 02s in this network. So I could show that what happened. So originally it started as an ISO message, and here's the PAC 008 with all the necessary bells and whistles what an ISO message is having. all the different IDs for instruction end-to-end and transaction IDs to identify the flows at different positions. And the critical part, what I would like to highlight, this instruction. So in the remittance info, if the participant is providing a modular loop ID, so a proxy ID type and the corresponding proxy ID, then our payment hub will start the process and forward this transaction to the other participant. So let me show you for a second that what happens in our system. Then this transaction goes through. This is the interface of our ZB system with the different workflows. And if I show the completed transactions, then I should see that today, and this means that the time is over for me. But anyway, what you could see that there was a transaction which went through across the green arrows, and I can identify all the timestamps when it took place. And I could see a tick mark here saying that this was completed successfully. And just one more item to be highlighted, that we obviously reuse the modular loop transaction. So in the ISO world, we received the transaction, we confirmed that we could take this account, then the money received, we book it to our account management system, and then if it requires forwarding to the modular loop network, then we initiated the forward to the other network. Good. So I could show you the accounts and all the payment hub operational user interfaces, but given the time, I will just skip through the slides that what dashboards and what additional things are available here. And one particular question that we could think of, that how to address accounts across the networks. We used a very simple remittance info to say that we want to forward this to a modular loop network, but probably it would be nice to handle this at the specification level and back and forth if we want to do this type of transactions. I prepared with a couple of other demonstrations, but let's stick with this one for today, and probably one more information on the roadmap items that I'm looking forward, that we were talking about the fraud detection part at the DFSP level. And as the fraud, let's say, work stream is progressing, it would be nice to see that the fraud tool could be used at the central, but also could be used at the DFSP level to monitor some of these transactions. Our documentation is available on the website, just like as all the codes, what we have developed. It's in the deck that how you could access it, and it provides extensive information that how to use the system, how to customize it, and also information that how someone could join our lab environment. So it's public, I would say. There's plenty of information that how to access the different DFSPs, what APIs are open, and how to start innovating on top of this lab environment. Thank you.
Yeah, and Ishwan, in the last 30 seconds, if you are able to show those operational UIs, I think that would be a valuable part to conclude the demo. So.
Very happy to do so. Let's say here's our instance. This is the payment hub operations management interface. So that's what for a tenant to see. And let me show you 05, which is our Leopard tenant, supposed to be. Let me see, yes, TN05. Sorry, this is 03, that's our instance. And on this interface, what anyone could see, that search for the incoming transaction, outgoing transactions, and the request to pay transactions similarly. And I should see an incoming transactions, what we just received from Leopard Bank, because that was the bank who transferred the SEPA transaction to the modular loop network. And I could see that this was successfully arrived, the 234 Tanzanian shilling. And I could see on this interface the details of this transaction, who was the payer, who was the payee, from the modular loop network point of view. So That's the transaction taken place. These are the different steps. And as an operator, if someone interested in the details, that I could see the different variables that is used in the transaction for this part. And then I could initiate certain actions from this transaction, look the model, and then in case there was some fraudulent transaction, I could the operator of the DFSP could initiate a refund transaction for this one. Yep. That's all probably what fits into our timeline for today.
Thanks so much, Sven. Do you want to wrap up with any last comments?
No, I think thanks. And then, yeah, the one demo that we didn't get to, we can share a link to that as part of the demo working group to demonstrate that. So thank you, Sven. And thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sven and Ed.